Today we're going to be starting a number of lessons in the matter of which is called in Hebrew Ma'agal Shana, the circular aspect of Jewish time. The Jewish year revolves around itself. We start at the beginning at Rosh Hashanah, and we cycle through the year and come back all the way to Rosh Hashanah at its end. But it all revolves around something called Jewish time. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's say you're invited to go to a simcha. That's a Jewish time of rejoicing. A wedding, for example, a bar mitzvah, something of that effect. And you look at the wedding invitation, and the invitation says 7:30 sharp. Well, 7:30 sharp, you get there right after rushing and rinsing and dressing, and finally you get there 7:30 sharp, you open the doors to the hall, and what do you find? It's just you and the owners of the simcha. You look around, you look to your right, you look to your left, you ask yourself, where is everybody? Well, asking yourself doesn't really answer anything, so you go to the organizer, say the mother of the bride, and you say to her, listen, Joan, where is everyone? She looks at you and says, oh, I guess they're running on Jewish time. Jewish time? What the heck is Jewish time? That's what I want to discuss with you. This is an introduction to the topic of the festivals and the Jewish year. We're going to look at Jewish time. Now, if we look at Jewish time from an objective perspective, we find that it can be boiled down into two cycles. There's the day-night cycle, and then there's the monthly, yearly cycle. Those are the two cycles of the Jewish year. Let me give a general description of these before we go into a little detail. The day-night cycle is relevant for many mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs which last a whole day. All of the festivals, per se, last a whole day. They start from the beginning of the day, they end at the end of the day. There are those mitzvahs as well that are only applicable, they're only commanded during the daytime. For example, the mitzvah of circumcision, the mitzvah of reading Kriyat Shema in the morning, the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema in the morning, all of these are time related, they're only applicable, they're only commanded during the daytime. There are those mitzvahs which we're commanded to keep only at night. For example, Pesach night, we all know Leila Seder, the Seder night, we sit around the table, we eat matzah, we eat the maror, we say the Haggadah. Those are all mitzvahs which are only to be kept at night. If you for whatever reason skipped the nighttime and you want to do them during the day, it just doesn't work. You're not commanded during the day. So there are day-night mitzvahs. There's a day-night time. We have to understand the day-night cycle. In addition to that, there's also the monthly cycle, right? The monthly, yearly cycle. There are months that revolve around and we cycle through them in order to get through year. All of these monthly cycles pertain to the festivals and also to the days of mourning that we have during the Jewish year. Now, as far as today's lesson is concerned, I want to focus mainly on the day-night cycle. But I would point out at this point that there is one exception to this, and that is the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day is not relevant to the monthly, yearly cycle. It's only relevant to the day-night cycle. Shabbos comes regardless of how we feel once every 7 days. It begins at night and goes to the next night. That's Shabbos. Shabbos is its own accord. Although it is one of the festivals, it is a festival unto itself. There is no festival like the Shabbos day, and we'll speak about that in a different lesson. So time is clearly an important matter when it comes to the Jewish year, Jewish time being an especially important time. To this end, Shlomo Melech says in Proverbs, in Mishlei, Et kol chefetz mitachat l'shamayim, there's a time for every desire under the sun. He tells us, right, the et livkot ve'et lispod, there's a time to laugh, there's a time to eulogize, and all sorts of different types of times Shlomo Melech goes through. There are times for the Jewish year. Time is important to Jews. I mean, especially, how in the world could we possibly know when to be late if we didn't know what time we were supposed to be there in the first place? So I would like to talk about that. We're going to discuss today the day-night cycle, and more importantly, how we're supposed to measure what is a day, what is a 24-hour day, and what is a daytime, what is nighttime. All of these things are relevant. We're going to focus on this cycle. So what's in a day? And what makes the Jewish day different than all of the days? So as opposed to the secular world, which counts a day basically starting from midnight, and of course midnight is measured according to our watches. Because it's measured according to our watches, well, it depends on how fine-tuned your watch is. Is your watch running slow? Is your watch running fast? Anybody can argue, well, it's not quite midnight yet, or no, midnight was a couple of minutes ago, and it all depends on what your watch is saying at this point in time. However, the Jewish day, as opposed to that, starts out at night. This we learn from a verse in Genesis. One of the first verses in Genesis says, Vayhi erev, vayhi voker yom echad. It was evening and it was morning. That's one day. From the fact that the Torah tells us that nighttime comes first, Vayhi erev. Erev, the time that the sun sets, is the beginning of the day. We learn that the Jewish day begins at night. This means that if you're going to wonder when your bar mitzvah is supposed to be, it's not supposed to be on the morning of the day that your birthday comes out. And of course, all of these things we measure based on the Jewish lunar calendar, not based on the Gregorian calendar. We'll discuss that in a different lesson. But really, a person becomes a bar mitzvah, a person becomes an adult from nighttime. From the time that the sun sets until, that's already the beginning of night, and a person becomes a man based on that. So that's the difference, first and foremost, between the Jewish year and the years as counted by the secular world. As far as what nightfall is, just hold on a minute, we'll get there in a second. The day of Shabbos, for example, is a 24-hour mitzvah. It's a mitzvah which starts at nightfall and goes until nightfall. Basically what that means is when it is clearly dark outside, after the sun is clearly set and it's clearly dark out, until such time as the sun sets on the following day, right, from Friday evening until Saturday evening, that is the day of Shabbos. It's a 24-hour period. Having said that, however, we Jews, since we love the mitzvah of Shabbos especially, most of us try and add a little bit more at the beginning and at the end. And we do that for our fervent love of the mitzvah. However, that's just Shabbos, but we'll get into a little bit further. We mentioned also that there are mitzvahs which are only applicable during the daytime, or mitzvahs that are only applicable during the nighttime. When do these come out? How are we supposed to measure them? When does the night begin and when does the day begin? Well, typically, like most topics, like most single topics, when there's two Jews, there'll be two opinions. Having said that, however, we should all know that there is a certain amount of time which is clearly not argued about. What time is this? From the time that it is clearly dark outside until the time that it is clearly light outside. That is certainly night. Where does the argument begin? The argument begins from the time that the sun sets until the time that three medium-sized stars come out. The pasuk in the verse in Genesis, as I quoted before, says, Vayi erev. The word erev doesn't mean nighttime. It means the time when the sun is setting. It is because of this that there is a discrepancy among our sages how to exactly interpret that verse. What does erev really mean? So the boundaries of this argument are as follows. Certainly after the sun has set, meaning that we no longer see the sun at all above the horizon, it's sunk below the horizon, until such time as these three medium stars have come out, that is a period of time which is not clear whether that's the beginning of night. So therefore, because it's not clear, as we call it in Hebrew, it's a suffix, therefore we address it accordingly. That means that when we're referring to festivals as listed in the Torah, all of the festivals of the Torah, that being Shabbos, that being the first and last day of Pesach, that being the first and last day of the festival of Sukkot, that being the day of Shavuos, all of these festivals which are mentioned in the Torah, all of them we're going to take the more stringent opinion in order to understand them. Why? Because in order to not damage the day, we'll discuss this further when we discuss each festival individually, but in order to not damage the day, we're going to shy away from entering a possibility of there being a problem. Therefore, when it comes to the mitzvah of Shabbos, which is something that we have every 7 days, the Sabbath day, we are going to start lighting our candles not at nightfall, not after it's clearly dark out, but we do it right before the sun sets. We are not going to leave the Sabbath day. We won't start performing melacha, which are acts of skilled labor, on the Sabbath day until such time as clearly the day has left, meaning until such time as night has fallen. There are three medium-sized stars visible in the sky. Why do we do that? Because we don't want to come to damage these holy days so that we cannot get the potential which are included in them. In addition to this, there are times that are limited specifically to the day. The day, for example, in Judaism is clear. There's no real argument about it, that from the time that the sun rises, we start seeing the sun over the horizon in the east until such time as it sets in the west, that is certainly a daytime. All the mitzvahs that we perform during the day, as I mentioned before, several of them, circumcision, Kriyat Shema, there are tefillin, for example, there are many others, tzitzis. All of these mitzvahs, which are specifically daytime mitzvahs, we're going to perform from the time that the sun rises until the time that the sun sets. However, there are mitzvahs which are more limited to specific times. For example, the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema in the morning, the mitzvah of tefillah in the morning, of reciting the prayer called Shmoneh Esrei. These are time-limited mitzvahs which can only be performed up until certain times. Now, I know that there are certain people in the world who feel that time revolves around them, the world revolves around them, but sorry, Charlie, when it comes to Judaism, morning is morning. Therefore, the question we have to ask ourselves is how to define time. How do we break up a day in Judaism? The truth is that Judaism, like the rest of the world, divides the day up into hours. However, as opposed to the secular world that divides the day up into 12 hours of 60 minutes, each minute of 60 seconds, the Jewish hour is divided up differently. As we mentioned, the Jewish day really revolves around sunup to sunset. Therefore, in order to understand what a Jewish hour is, we do the following. We measure the amount of time from sunup to sunset, and we divide that into a 12-hour period. That means that if sunup is at 6 a.m., and sundown is at 6 p.m., therefore the Jewish clock and the non-Jewish clock, the secular clock, agree with each other. An hour is a time period of 60 minutes only. However, during the summer months, where the days are longer, and during the winter months, when the days are shorter, the hour period of the Jewish day changes entirely. During the summer months, you can have an hour which are anywhere between 72 to 75 minutes. During the winter, where sunup is relatively late and sundown is relatively early, you can have a time period where an hour is 54 to 58 minutes. It doesn't require that there be 60 minutes. It's for this, one of the reasons that we have this is because of the changing of the seasons, which is so incredibly important, especially when we relate it to the other cycle of the year, the monthly, yearly cycle. But we'll get into that on a different lesson. It all depends on the length of the days. Therefore, during the summer months, when the hour is longer, we have much more time to perform these mitzvahs. For example, the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema. Our sages tell us that the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema in the morning, of reciting the Shema as it's called, we're supposed to do it from the time slightly before sunup until 3 hours of the day. So if 3 hours of the day, say the sun rises at 6 a.m. in order to make things simple, and the hour in halacha is 75 minutes, that's 75 times 3, that comes out to a little over 3 3.75 hours. So that means that at 9:45 you have to have finished saying Kriyat Shema already. As opposed to that, during the winter months, when the hours of the day are shorter and they're less than 60 minutes, assuming once again that sunup is at 6 o'clock and it's a 55, say, minute hour, so you have much less time until you'll have a little bit over 2 hours and 40 minutes to finish Kriyat Shema according to our clocks. For this reason, the Jewish cycle has always been different than the cycle of the rest of the year. Because since we don't follow a set time, we don't follow 60 minutes that are set, we don't follow 60 minutes that are made out of 60 seconds. We follow an hour which is made up of sunrise to sunset. Therefore, the Jewish cycle tends to be different than the rest of the world. So, if for whatever reason you find that you have difficulty keeping to a clock hour, right? If the invitation says 7:30 and you find that you consistently can't make it on time, don't worry. That's your Jewishness showing. All you are experiencing is the historical buildup of running on Jewish time. And since you have Jewish roots, therefore your Jewish clock tells you 60 minutes is not an hour. God willing, in the coming lessons, we'll discuss the monthly, yearly cycle, and then we'll start discussing the festivals of the Jewish year. Thank you very much.